All right, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going back in time, back to 1692 to Salem,
The Salem witch trials.
the Salem witch trials. And you probably think you know the story, but
Mm-hmm.
we've got some excerpts here from a Wondery podcast episode, and trust me, this stuff it's pretty shocking. Some
Yeah.
details you probably never even heard before.
There's always more to the story, right?
Yeah.
I think we're going to really peel back the layers and get into, sort of the human drama behind these accusations and these trials, and, just see how fear can really grip a community and turn people against each other
Yeah.
really quickly.
So picture this. You're in Salem Village, 1692.
Okay.
It's harsh, right?
Yeah.
You've got these freezing winters, you've got Native Americans possibly attacking, threats of attacks, disease outbreaks.
Mhm.
It's not a walk in the park.
No, not at all.
And, thinking about all these anxieties, I mean, those factors really create this breeding ground for suspicion, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you have a community that is really like a tinderbox waiting for a spark.
Right.
And then that spark comes in the form of these accusations of witchcraft.
Okay. And so that leads us to one of the most, I think, mind-blowing stories from the trials, which is the story of Giles Corey.
Oh, yeah.
So imagine you're accused of witchcraft. This is a crime that is punishable by death.
Right.
What do you do? I mean, most people would probably fight for their lives, right?
Of course, yeah.
Most people.
Giles Corey, he does something completely different. He refuses to stand trial.
Refuses.
Can you imagine?
Oh.
You imagine the guts it would take?
Well,
I
think
know.
there are a couple of things to keep in mind here, right?
Okay.
One is that if he's convicted,
Hmm.
all of his land, his property, will be seized by the state.
Oh, okay.
But if he refuses to plead,
Hmm.
then his sons inherit the property.
Wow. So this is like a calculated.
It was a calculator.
Yes.
It's
Well,
a gamble, for sure, driven by love for his family, but also by a deep distrust of the court.
Absolutely. It was, a move's born out of love for his family and also deep distrust of the court.
And the court responds with, just an act of unimaginable cruelty.
Oh, yeah.
It's called pressing.
Hmm.
And they literally pile heavy stones on his chest until he either enters a plea or he dies.
It was brutal. It was barbaric.
Wow.
And, it was so barbaric that it was never again used in colonial New England.
Wow.
But it does highlight the absolute terror that was surrounding these trials.
Right.
People were willing to endure almost anything to avoid facing a system that seemed rigged against them.
Yeah. And speaking of rigged, let's talk about spectral evidence.
Okay.
Because this is what turns a whisper into a death sentence, right?
Right.
So again, here it's 1692 Salem, you believe in the supernatural as much as you believe in the crops that you're planting,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then your neighbor says they saw your spirit, your spectral form attacking them in a dream.
That's spectral evidence.
Yeah.
And it carried immense weight.
Really?
Yeah.
So your neighbor's nightmare could send you to the gallows?
Basically, yes. I
Yeah.
mean, it really was that precarious.
Wow. That's insane.
It is.
Okay, so we've got a community on edge. We've got a court system that is willing to use torture. And you've got this whole concept of spectral evidence, which basically makes anyone vulnerable. Have these accusations.
Absolutely.
And then enter three women,
Okay.
Martha Corey,
Mm-hmm.
Mary Easty,
Okay.
Mary Bradbury. These are pillars of their community,
Respected women.
respected women.
But they become prime examples of how easily accusations could spiral
Really?
out of control.
So, what happened?
Well, for example, one accuser claimed that Mary Bradbury turned into a blue boar.
A blue boar.
A blue boar.
I mean, how do you even
It's impossible to defend yourself
defend yourself against that?
against something like that.
Yeah.
And that's the point, right? Logic and reason went out the window when it came to spectral evidence.
So even if you had character witnesses, even if you had people saying,
Didn't matter.
hey, no, this person would never do that.
It didn't matter.
Didn't matter.
Even strong character witnesses and pleas for reason were totally ignored.
Wow. And looming over all of this is the church,
Right.
which was a powerful force in 17th century Salem.
Oh, yeah.
And then you have Reverend Samuel Parris.
Mm-hmm.
His own daughter, Abigail, was one of the first accusers.
Right.
So imagine this scene. Reverend Parris visits Martha Corey in prison,
Yeah.
this cramped, dark prison cell,
Right.
not to offer her comfort,
Right.
but to inform her that she's been excommunicated from the church.
Wow.
Well,
That's a social and spiritual death sentence, right?
yeah.
It's cutting her off from her community, her
Sure.
support system,
Right.
potentially even her path to salvation, so it really adds
Hmm.
insult to injury, right?
Yeah, and it just makes you wonder how much of Paris's zeal was driven by genuine religious conviction
Right.
and how much was fueled by his own anxieties.
It's hard to say for sure, but his fiery sermons about the devil's influence
Right.
certainly added fuel to the fire, right?
Hmm.
Created an atmosphere of paranoia and suspicion, encouraged people to see enemies everywhere.
Yeah, so we've got this recipe for disaster, right? A community primed for suspicion, a legal system that is embracing spectral evidence, a church leader stoking the flames of fear.
Hmm.
What happens next? Does anyone try to put the brakes on this?
Well, there are some voices of dissent.
Okay.
For example, you have a respected magistrate, Robert Pike.
Okay.
He actually writes a letter criticizing the use of spectral evidence.
Oh, wow.
He argued that it was too unreliable to justify taking a life.
Wow, so he's basically saying, like, hold on a second.
Yeah.
We're condemning people based on dreams
On dreams and vision,
and visions.
which are inherently unreliable,
Right.
as evidence.
And that's not right.
Exactly.
That's pretty brave of him.
It was a brave stance, but sadly, it was largely ignored,
Really?
at least initially.
Wow.
Chief Justice William Stoughton, the presiding judge in many of the trials,
Mhm.
seemed determined to press on,
Wow.
convinced of the righteousness of his cause, and so the court continued to hand down convictions and death sentences at an alarming rate.
At an alarming rate. And then you have September 19th, 1692.
Right.
This is a day that just, I mean, it will forever stain the history of Salem, right?
Absolutely.
8 people,
8 people
including Martha Corey,
Hmm.
are hanged.
hanged.
Can you imagine
That's hard to fathom.
the grief, the terror?
The sense of utter hopelessness
Yeah.
that must have permeated the community.
And then, in the midst of all this, Mary Easty,
Mm.
who's also been sentenced to death,
All right.
she writes this powerful letter to Governor Phipps and the judges,
So,
pleading for an end to the bloodshed.
a desperate plea for reason in a time of utter madness.
Would anyone listen?
That's the question, isn't it? I mean, it's hard to imagine, right? Like just the weight of that moment. 8 innocent lives lost.
Right.
And Mary Eastie's letter, it's like this heartbreaking cry for sanity, this desperate attempt to just break through this hysteria that had gripped the community.
Yeah, and it wasn't just Mary Easty, right? I mean, you start to see more and more people questioning the trials, right?
Absolutely.
They'd seen their neighbors, their friends, even family members accused and condemned based on the flimsiest of evidence.
Mm-hmm. The cracks in this facade of certainty were definitely beginning to show.
Right, right. It's like the tide was starting to turn.
Exactly.
And then this major figure enters the picture, Increase Mather.
Increased math.
There's highly influential Puritan minister.
Mhm.
I mean, this guy, if you were in Salem, he was like the rock star intellectual of his time.
Yeah, he was very influential.
When he speaks, people listen, and what he says sends shockwaves through the community.
He writes this book, Cases of Conscience Concerning Evil Spirits Personating Men, and it's really a bombshell.
What does he say?
He argues that it's better to let 10 guilty witches go free than to condemn one innocent person.
Wow, he's basically saying, like, we need to err on the side of caution here.
Absolutely. We're talking about people's lives.
Right, right.
And he wasn't alone. Several other ministers joined him, publicly denouncing the reliance on spectral evidence.
So the court's authority is starting to crumble under the weight of these critiques.
Yes, it's starting to crumble.
And then, almost like a scene from a movie, Governor Phipps's own wife gets accused of witchcraft.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine the pressure he must have been under?
I mean, that's incredible. The stability of the entire colony was at stake.
So he's got to do something.
He has to act, and he does. He suspends the trials,
Okay.
prohibits further arrests.
Okay, so that's big, but what about all those people who are already in prison?
Right.
What happens to them?
So with the Court of Oyer and Terminer dissolved, a new court is established to handle the remaining cases,
Okay.
the Superior Court of Judicature.
Okay, so this is like night and day.
It is a major shift.
This new court is like, spectral evidence. Nope, not buying it anymore. We need real proof.
Yeah, they demanded more tangible evidence. They focused on confessions, eyewitness accounts of actual witchcraft.
So things you could see and hear, not just dream about.
Exactly. Things grounded in, a more sort of rational understanding of evidence.
It's amazing how quickly public opinion can shift and how those shifts can really impact the law, right?
It is fascinating, isn't it, how these sort of social and cultural forces can really shape the legal landscape.
Yeah, but even with this new, supposedly fairer system, there were still injustices, right?
But yes.
I mean, many people, even though they were acquitted, they remained in jail simply because they couldn't afford to pay their fees.
Think about that, right? You're cleared of witchcraft, but you're still stuck behind bars,
Just because you can't buy your freedom.
right? It's a stark reminder that justice, even when it's served, can be deeply flawed and unequal.
And one story that really highlights this is the case of Tituba, Reverend Paris's enslaved woman.
Right.
She was one of the first accused, and she confessed, probably under duress, naming others and fueling that early panic.
Mm-hmm.
But even after a grand jury refused to indict her, she remained imprisoned.
Yeah, because Paris wouldn't pay her fees.
Oh.
He actually ends up selling her to someone else to cover the costs.
That's that's awful.
It is. It's a tragic example of how marginalized individuals were particularly vulnerable during these trials.
So the trials officially end, but Salem is forever changed, right?
It's hard to overstate the impact.
19 people hanged, one pressed to death, others dying in prison.
It's devastating.
Can you imagine the weight of that grief, the trauma that lingered in the community?
It's almost unimaginable, right? Families torn apart, reputations ruined, property seized.
So how does a community heal from such a horrific experience? How do they even begin to move forward?
It was a long and arduous process, a combination of both individual and collective efforts.
Okay.
Some people, they simply left, unable to bear the weight of those memories. Others stayed and fought to clear their names to rebuild their lives.
And what about Reverend Paris? I mean, he can't just pretend nothing happened, right?
He faced a reckoning of his own.
Yeah, I bet he did.
There was mounting criticism for his role in the trials. People accused him of stoking the flames of fear and paranoia. His authority diminished, and eventually, after years of conflict, he was forced to resign.
Wow, it's a reminder that, our actions have consequences, even if we believe we're acting in the name of righteousness.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just about individuals, right? There were also attempts at formal reconciliation, official acknowledgments of the wrongs that had been committed.
So, like, what kind of attempts?
Well, in 1697, just 5 years after the trials, the Superior Court declared a day of fasting and soul-searching, a public acknowledgement of the injustices.
Okay, so it's like a public apology.
It was a powerful gesture, an admission of guilt, and a plea for forgiveness.
Did anyone else involved in the trials express remorse? I mean, it seems like it would be hard to live with the knowledge that you'd played a part in such a tragedy.
You're right, and some of those involved did come forward.
Okay.
Judge Samuel Sewell, one of the judges who had presided over the trials, he publicly apologized,
Wow.
expressing deep remorse for his actions.
Wow, that must have been a difficult thing to do.
It was, but it was a crucial step in the healing process. It showed that even those in power could admit their mistakes, that they were willing to be held accountable.
And it helped to pave the way for further acts of reconciliation?
It did.
What kind of acts?
Well, in 1702, the trials were officially declared unlawful,
Okay.
and the use of spectral evidence was banned. It was as if the colony was trying to erase the legal basis for what had transpired to make sure such a travesty could never happen again.
And then what?
And then, in 1711, the colonial legislature took an even bolder step. They overturned 22 convictions.
Wow, so they're formally clearing the names of those who had been unjustly accused and executed.
It was a long time coming, but it was a significant act of justice.
And they didn't stop there, right?
No, they went even further. They granted financial restitution to the heirs of those who had been wrongly executed.
So trying to compensate for the property that had been seized.
Exactly. It was an attempt to right the wrongs, to acknowledge the suffering that had been inflicted.
And what about Reverend Green, the minister who replaced Paris? He must have had his work cut out for him trying to lead a community that was so deeply divided.
He did. He was a young man, just 27 years old when he took on the role, but he was deeply committed to healing the wounds of Salem.
So what did he do?
He preached forgiveness, encouraged dialogue, and even rearranged the seating in the church,
Really?
forcing former rivals to sit side by side.
Wow. Talk about a bold move.
He was really trying to foster understanding, to force people to confront their differences and find a way to coexist.
And one of his most significant acts, I think, involves Martha Corey, the woman we discussed earlier who had been excommunicated before her execution.
Yes, he was instrumental in getting her excommunication reversed.
Wow, so he persuaded the congregation to formally clear her name?
He did. In 1703, they reversed Martha Corey's excommunication, restoring her good name and offering a measure of peace to her family.
It's just a beautiful act of redemption, both for Martha Corey and for the community.
It really is. It shows that they were willing to confront their past mistakes and try to make things right.
And it wasn't just about righting the wrongs of the past, right? I mean, Reverend Green also understood the importance of personal accountability.
He did. He encouraged one of the original accusers, Ann Putnam Jr., to publicly apologize for her role in the trials.
Wow, that's incredible. So even the accusers, those who had helped to fuel the hysteria, they were given a chance to seek redemption.
Absolutely. In 1706, when Putnam applied to join the church, Green helped her craft a statement expressing deep remorse for her actions.
What did she say?
She confessed that she had been a great delusion of Satan and feared she had been instrumental in the shedding of innocent blood. She specifically mentioned Rebecca Nurse, one of the executed victims, and her sisters, expressing profound regret for the suffering she had caused them and their families.
Wow, that must have taken incredible courage to stand before the congregation and admit that you had played a part in such a horrific chapter.
It did. And the fact that the church accepted her apology, welcoming her into their community, it speaks volumes about their commitment to forgiveness and reconciliation.
So the Salem witch trials are over, but their legacy lives on. What lessons can we learn from this dark chapter in American history?
Right. What insights can we glean that might help us to avoid similar outbreaks of fear and intolerance in our own time? That's the crucial question, isn't it?
Yeah, it feels really relevant, especially today.
It does. The trials stand as this stark warning about the dangers of unchecked fear, the abuse of power, and the fragility of justice.
Yeah.
But they also offer us a glimmer of hope. The community's efforts at reconciliation, their willingness to confront their past mistakes, and their attempts to heal the wounds they had inflicted. It really demonstrates the enduring power of the human spirit to learn, grow, and strive for a better future.
And those lessons are more relevant than ever today, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, we see similar dynamics at play in our own time.
We do.
The spread of misinformation, the demonization of those who hold different views, the erosion of trust in institutions.
Right. And that's why it's so important to study history, to learn from the mistakes of the past, and to recognize the warning signs of intolerance and extremism.
Mm-hmm.
The Salem witch trials remind us that we're all capable of falling prey to fear and prejudice, but they also show us that we have the power to choose a different path.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Salem witch trials, I think it's fitting to leave our listeners with a final thought-provoking question. What have you learned from this journey? How has it changed your perspective on history, on human nature, on your own role in the world?
Yeah, that's a great question to ponder.
Yeah.
Remember, history is not just a collection of dates and facts. It's a story about people, about their choices, their triumphs, and their failures.
Yeah.
And by studying history, we can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. And Salem also teaches us this critical lesson about the dangers of rushing to judgment based on incomplete information or unchecked emotions, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah. And we see that playing out again and again in the trials, right?
We do.
People jumping to conclusions, letting fear cloud their judgment.
Think of how quickly those accusations spread, right? Often fueled by gossip, personal grudges, or just, plain panic.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder that we need to be wary of taking things at face value, especially, when emotions run high.
It's like that saying, right? A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes.
That's right.
And in today's world with social media, I mean, things spread even faster.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we're bombarded with information constantly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's so easy to get swept up in the latest outrage or conspiracy theory. But
Right.
Salem reminds us to take a breath, to question what we see and hear, and to really seek out the truth, even when it's uncomfortable.
That's easier said than done, though, right?
It is.
Sometimes it feels like going against the tide, especially when everyone around you seems so sure of themselves.
It definitely takes courage, yeah. But that's, I think, where critical thinking comes in, right?
Right.
It's about questioning our assumptions, considering different perspectives, and being open to changing our minds when presented with new evidence.
Yeah. thinking about Salem also makes me consider the importance of due
Due
process.
process.
Those accused of witchcraft, they're often denied basic legal rights, like the right to confront their accusers
Right.
or present evidence in their defense.
That's such a fundamental principle,
Right.
and one that we still grapple with today.
Mm.
Right. It's easy to get caught up in the desire for swift justice, especially when we're dealing with horrific crimes.
Mm-hmm.
But Salem reminds us that a fair and impartial system, it requires protecting the rights of all individuals,
Mm-hmm.
even those accused of wrongdoing.
Yeah, so we've talked about confirmation bias, the need for critical thinking, the importance of empathy and due process.
Right.
These are some pretty heavy lessons to carry with us.
They are heavy, but they're incredibly important.
Yeah.
And I think there's one more element to consider here.
Okay.
It's about the role of individual responsibility.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, we often talk about systemic issues, and those are certainly crucial to understanding how things work. But Salem also highlights the impact of individual choices.
Right.
Each person involved in those trials, from the accusers to the judges
Right.
to the everyday villagers, they had a role to play.
Yeah, they all made choices that contributed to the events, for better or worse.
Exactly. Some acted with courage, speaking out against the injustice they saw. Others were driven by fear, ambition, or even just a desire to fit in.
Yeah.
It's a powerful reminder that we all have a responsibility
Right.
to act with integrity, to challenge injustice,
Yeah.
and to really speak up for what we know is right.
It's so easy to think that one person can't make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
But Salem shows us that individual actions can have this ripple effect.
They absolutely can.
Yeah.
Even small acts of courage or kindness, they can shift the tide.
Right.
They can inspire others to do the same, creating a wave of positive change.
Yeah, so as we wrap up our deep dive into the Salem witch trials, I'm left with this feeling of, well, it's a complex story, right?
Yeah.
It's dark, it's tragic, but there's also this glimmer of hope.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, yeah. It's a tale of human fallibility and how fear and intolerance can lead to unimaginable cruelty.
Right.
But it's also a testament to the human spirit's resilience,
Mhm.
to our capacity for forgiveness,
Yeah.
and to our enduring pursuit of justice.
And I think that's what makes these deep dives so fascinating. We're
Right.
not just rehashing the past,
Mm.
but we're really wrestling with its complexities and drawing out insights that can help us navigate the present.
Yeah, I think you got it, yeah. That's the beauty of history, right?
Mhm.
It's a conversation that spans generations.
Yeah.
Inviting us to learn, reflect, and strive for a better future.
So to our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this journey to Salem.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We hope you found it thought-provoking and maybe even a little bit challenging.
Absolutely.
And we encourage you to keep exploring this story and its many layers.
Yeah, there's always more to learn.
It's a story that continues to resonate with us today, reminding us of the power and the fragility of human nature.
It does.
And as always, keep diving deep, keep questioning, and keep seeking the truth.
That's right.
Until next time, stay curious.